Welcome to Section 4 and Lesson 2 of Hope. In the previous lesson, you learned about how Jesus faced painful emotions and how God invites us to face our brokenness honestly like Nehemiah as he wept over the ruins of the Wall of Jerusalem. The Bible also tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:4 that there is a time to weep and a time to mourn. When we are facing past trauma and the pain that it brings, it is appropriate for it to be a time to mourn. In this lesson, you will learn more about how trauma and past pain have affected you and the biblical picture and process of how healing and transformation can take place in your life. This is a long lesson, and it is intended to give you the bigger picture of the process of healing and transformation. In this lesson, we will also begin to dive more deeply into how past trauma affects us, so please take your time completing this lesson and the reflections and activities that follow. Feel free to pause or stop the video along the way if you need to, or watch it in pieces to allow yourself time to reflect or process emotions. Let's begin by exploring another biblical image of how God brings about change in our lives. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus tells us a parable about a farmer who went out to sow seed for his fields to produce a crop. However, while spreading the seed, it falls on different kinds of ground, affecting the seed's growth and ultimately the fruit it produces. Although this parable is specifically about spiritual growth, it provides principles for how we can understand our personal growth, healing, and sanctification in general, including our emotional growth. So let's start by reading some of this parable together. Matthew 13 says, "Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, and because the soil was shallow, when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, some 100, some 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear." Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke out the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. When people come to me for counseling, one of the first things they do is describe their symptoms, or in view of this parable, the fruit of their personal tree that they are concerned about. As we have already discussed, this fruit usually includes a variety of negative emotions, behaviors, habits, thoughts, or relationship concerns. This makes sense as these are the obvious areas of pain or problems they are facing. Further, people have usually tried one or more things on their own to help themselves produce better fruit or solve the problems with their crop before they come to see me. As we discussed in Section 3, they have tried to manage their symptoms and change what seems to be the cause of the problem as best they can, but it isn't working. However, as we think about ourselves as a tree bearing fruit for a crop, the real problem is that trees don't have direct control over their fruit, as we have discussed, whether what kind it is or how much they produce, and neither do we. We can certainly make choices about our behavior, and we should to the best of our ability with God's help, but we do not have direct control over changing all of our feelings, desires, thoughts, or behaviors just by saying so. If I'm not happy being an apple tree, I cannot simply tell my tree to stop producing apples and start producing peaches. I also cannot simply tell my tree to automatically start producing more or less of the fruit that it does. Why? Because trees produce fruit according to what they are, and the soil their seed is planted in, and to be a healthy tree with healthy fruit requires certain things. When it comes to the emotional, behavioral, and relational fruit in our lives, we can make choices about our behavior, and we should to the best of our ability with God's help, but we do not have direct control over changing all of our feelings, desires, thoughts, or behaviors just by saying so. In other words, willpower and choices, although vitally important, are not enough. And willpower alone will not solve our problems. That is not how trees work. As described in section 2 of Hope, Jesus reminded of this reality for us when he said our real problem was in the heart. That is, out of the heart that comes our deepest struggles and sin, and we don't have direct control over the ability to change our hearts on our own. We need God's help from the inside out. So to better understand this process and how our soil and circumstances affect our fruit, let's go back to the soil as Jesus described it in the parable. In the parable, Jesus describes several kinds of soil and the impact that it has on fruit. First, he says that there is seed that fell on the path or hard ground where the message was not understood. Sometimes that is where we or those we love are. We do not understand the truth about our emotions or behaviors, and we may not want to hear it. It may simply fall to the wayside, and we ignore it or spend all of our energy avoiding it or defending our position. Next, Jesus describes the rocky ground, representing a person who is open to and receives the truth, but it has no root or lasting impact. As soon as trouble or persecution or conflict or pressure come their way, they quickly turn away. They are not willing to do the work or apply what the truth requires for actual change to occur. Third, there is the thorny ground, which Jesus says represents the worries of life and the deceitfulness of wealth that can choke it out and kill the fruit. If you are watching this video, this is likely part of your concern. You believe and trust God, but the worries and pain of life are impacting you and your ability to feel you can produce healthy or abundant fruit. Thorns and trouble come to everyone, and being here is a sign that you are committed to letting God help you with the thorns and find a way forward. Finally, Jesus described the good soil. These are people who hear the truth and understand it and produce fruit of 30, 60, or 100-fold. However, note here that even the good soil doesn't always produce the same amount of fruit. This last part is good news for all of us because it helps us to know that God understands our tree and our soil, and that our job is to be faithful in partnering with Him to clean up our soil and grow our trees so they can produce fruit, not to determine how much fruit it will exactly be. Indeed, our fruit is affected by many things, as we are about to see, and comparing how much fruit my tree produces compared to yours would not be fair because some people's soil and trees have more affecting their health and growth than others. And God is the master gardener, not me, and He loves and cares for all of His trees. From a biblical point of view, we all start out as a seed planted in the soil of the world with things we can't control and did not have choices about. For example, when it comes to our seed, we do not choose to have a sin nature when we are born. The Bible says we are all born as members of Adam's rebellious race and need to be born again into Christ to have a new nature. Romans 5:12 says, "Through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned." The seed element in the biblical picture of the tree represents those aspects of who we are that are a part of our genetic or human endowment, including personal and spiritual factors that we did not choose. It is with these inherent and inherited factors that we are planted into a unique soil of time and circumstances in the world, and our seeds include our genetic traits and predispositions, biological sex, ethnic characteristics, temperament, and other inherited qualities. This does not mean that all inherited qualities are good, however. The reality that some people are genetically prone to alcoholism, for example, does not mean that alcoholism is therefore natural and should be affirmed and celebrated. But it does mean that it is important to face the reality of how sin affects us even at the seed level, and our responses as we seek transformation from trauma and spiritual growth. Sin affects all of us and our relationships, regardless of all the other ways we may have been hurt, and it can lead us to unhealthy choices and bad behavior, regardless of how healthy our upbringing was or how many emotional wounds we do or do not have. However, there are also a variety of other things we do not choose that impact who we are and our options and choices. Our soil represents the things in our environment that we did not choose, yet impact our soul and development after we came into the world. So what are some things you can think of that we don't get to choose when we get planted into the world? Here is my general list of things we do not directly choose. We don't choose our culture, community, and subculture. We don't choose family of origin and what its makeup looks like. We don't choose the painful experiences, events, and circumstances, including episodes of abuse and neglect that we may have. We don't choose available relationships, traumatic experiences, and other hurtful events. We don't choose chronic stress or inadequate resources or the problematic situations we may be a part of. And we don't choose our economic status, the availability of nutrition, or healthcare opportunities, or supports and resources for wellness, exercise, or play. However, because they make up a major part of our soil, families, caregivers, and those closest to us are typically people who have the greatest impact on our tree and its development in terms of things we do not choose. So let's take a few minutes to look deeper at how we can be hurt by family and caregivers who contributed so much to our soil. Even if we are born into healthy families, as we have said, there are a variety of things we do not choose that can impact our emotions and well-being. In her book, Hurt People, Dr. Sandra Wilson provides a helpful summary of the kinds of people we are often wounded by. First, there's the unprepared. People who fall into this category are often doing the best they know, but are typically unprepared or ill-equipped emotionally or in skill or maturity and hurt others by default. They lack understanding, insight, or knowledge of what to do or say or how best to relate to others, especially sometimes children. We all know or have known people in this category who say or do actively or passively hurtful things out of their own deficits, even if they are mostly well-meaning. Sometimes these people are parents, leaders, or others who have significant roles in our lives. Next is the unrealistic and unaware. These are similar to those just described and often lack understanding of childhood development and or lack good boundaries or social and communication skills when working with children or with others. As a result, they have unrealistic and unreasonable expectations of others and especially children. They may also have distorted or unhealthy expectations of parent-child relationships or what children are or are not capable of at different stages. People in this category often bring their own unhealthy patterns and pain into their roles and unknowingly treat others poorly out of their own shortcomings, biases, or faulty beliefs. Next are the unavailable. These are typically people preoccupied with life, personal problems, poor priorities, addictions, private pain, illness, or other life-impacting or dominating problems. The unavailable are often too busy, tired, or preoccupied to meet the needs of children or others, even if they are physically present. We can also be hurt by the unavailable due to divorce, abandonment, or death, which are sometimes the result of other painful circumstances that the person did or did not choose. People in these above three categories may be unaware that they are wounding others, and the wounds they cause may be harder to identify depending on our circumstances. Just like malnutrition takes longer to affect someone physically, neglect or the lack of ability to meet the needs of somebody emotionally, especially children, is sometimes harder to identify. Often the people in our lives who may fit one of the above categories loved us, and we did know it, but they also had deficits or issues in these areas. Also, because children love their parents and know that their parents still love them and may be doing their best, it can be difficult to acknowledge the impact of the neglect or hurt sustained. However, to heal, it is important that we acknowledge truth, both good and bad, to find the best way forward. The final category is the unkind. These are those people that inflict wounds actively through verbal, physical, or sexual means such as name-calling, put-downs, shaming, demeaning and use of derogatory language and words, physical abuse such as slapping, hitting, kicking, punching, shoving, scratching, burning, or throwing objects at someone, or through sexual abuse such as penetrating, fondling, inappropriately touching, caressing, rubbing, or arousing somebody, or treating them in inappropriate sexual ways. The unkind can also abuse children or others by causing them to witness or be exposed to verbal, physical, or sexual abuse, such as episodes of violence, sexual acts, criminal activity, or pornography, to name a few. We can, of course, also experience emotional wounds from people in a variety of roles or settings who also have one or more of the traits described above, whether as children or adults, from people such as coaches, teachers, pastors, spouses, bosses, older siblings, friends, strangers, and more. But often the most significant damage or effects are too often experienced from people who are primary family members or caregivers. When we experience these significant hurts that create fear, helplessness, and feelings of rejection or abandonment as children, we develop damaged emotional roots. So let's take some time to look more closely at how exactly this occurs. Our experiences in the soil, such as the things we just described, are of vital importance because they affect our sense of security and lay a foundation for our faith and trust in God. In essence, we receive and perceive messages in our environments about whether others are accessible, responsive, and engaged with us as children, and whether they are consistently and adequately capable and there for us to establish a reasonable sense of security, predictability, and structure to develop a sense of safety and trust. Let's look at how this process works and how trauma and painful experience affects our roots and our sense of trust. First, we need to acknowledge that the things that we did not choose, whether in our seed or soil, affect our experiences and reality, both inside and out. The events and experiences we have are real and impact our emotional roots as we have described, and can result in emotional wounds that affect our hearts and even our sense of identity. Emotional wounds and painful experiences in our soil can leave us with feelings of insecurity, rejection, not being good enough, a low view of ourselves and our worth, jealousy, fears, a deep sense of injustice, feelings of incompetence, bitterness, and even more at a deeper level. These damaged roots are the painful and unresolved wounds under the soil of our tree that continue to affect its health and produce the fruit we experience in our current lives. Research over the last 3 decades on adverse childhood events, or ACEs, and trauma, as has been previously described, support this reality. A summary of this information, as seen below, can be found on the ACE Response website. An ACE, or Adverse Childhood Experience, is defined as experiencing any of the following categories of abuse, neglect, or loss prior to the age of 18. Physical abuse by a parent, emotional abuse by a parent, sexual abuse by anyone, growing up with an alcohol and/or drug abuser in the household, experiencing the incarceration of a household member, living with a family member experiencing mental illness, domestic violence, loss of a parent, emotional neglect, or physical neglect. The ACE study began in 1994 and was a partnership between the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente that assessed the relationship between adult health risk behaviors and childhood abuse and household dysfunction. The study began with a sample of over 9,000 individuals, representing a 70.5% response rate. That is very significant for any study, and the respondents were given a score of 1 for each of the ACE categories they experienced as listed above. Findings show that people who experienced 4 or more adverse childhood events had increased risk for smoking, alcoholism, and drug abuse. It also showed that they had increased risk for depression, mental health problems, and suicide attempts. and poor self-rated health. People with 4 or more ACE events also reported having 50 or more sexual partners in their lifetime, and a greater likelihood of sexually transmitted disease, challenges with physical inactivity, and severe obesity. A follow-up sample combined with baseline data for a total of 17,337 participants showed additional findings that ACE score is associated with likelihood of attempted suicide across the lifespan, increased risk for broken bones, increased risk for heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, and multiple types of cancer. ACE scores were also correlated with impaired job functioning, homelessness, and criminal justice involvement. Overall, the ACE study data found that for each adverse childhood event identified, the chances of suffering from one or more mental or physical health issues later in life increased significantly with each event. So let's look more closely at why these health and life outcomes are connected to childhood trauma, and what happens when children experience significant hurts, chronic unresolved problems, and adverse events such as those in the study. First, adverse childhood experiences affect us because we are wounded by these adverse events and relational experiences, primarily because significant emotional needs go unmet. Aside from the trauma of the actual event or hurt we experienced, our God-given needs that reflect our being made in His image go unmet as a result as well. These include the need for competence. Competence is our God-given need to believe that we can complete needed tasks, can cope with situations, or can handle life. Competence comes through us as a sense of assurance and belief in my skills and abilities, and gives a sense of hope and of purpose. Highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, affect our belief in our abilities, agency, and that we can make a difference in life or our situation. Next is the need for belonging. Belonging is our God-given relational need to be wanted, cared for, enjoyed, and connected to others who love and accept us. Belonging comes through acceptance and safe connections with others and gives us faith and trust in others and relationships to adequately meet our emotional needs. Highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, disrupt our sense of safety and belonging due to stress, fear, of loss or inability of others to connect with us and respond effectively to our emotional needs. The need for worth and value is also affected by trauma and adverse events. The need for worth and value represents our being made in God's image and the need to know that we count, have personal value just for who we are. Our sense of worth and value comes through affirmation, attention, affection, and a sense of blessing in relationship with others. These give us an experience of love and value and meaning as we connect with others that are close to us. Highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, communicate shame and devalue others and leave us feeling diminished, as if we don't count, matter, or aren't good enough for others. And finally, the need for safety and security is not met when we encounter adverse childhood events and experiences. Because we live in human bodies and are made for intimacy and connection, the need to feel safe physically and emotionally is real. Safety comes from knowing that things and people are predictable, stable, and that we can rely on someone to meet our basic and emotional physical needs. Safety and security help us to know we can trust and have faith that we are protected and provided for and safe from harm. Highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, tend to communicate instability, unreliability, unpredictability, and consistent fear of actual hurt or loss. The second way that childhood wounds significantly affect us is that the situations or events also rob us of the grace and guidance we need to develop well. So not only are our underlying needs not met, but we're not getting the kind of environment and circumstances we need on another level. Grace gives us a context to feel loved and accepted for who we are, even when we fail or make mistakes, while appropriate guidance provides us understanding and modeling of healthy truth and boundaries so we can learn to navigate life according to God's design. We need consistent grace and guidance to grow emotionally because getting needs met, and therefore positive emotional growth, requires first relational trust and safety, because without it we will focus on protection and self-reliance. Adverse events, losses, and painful experiences can damage our sense of trust and faith in God in others. Second, it also requires risk-taking within appropriate and consistent boundaries and truth. And without a healthy framework of taking risks, we can't develop competence and confidence in our ability to handle the challenges of life well, and we tend to focus on things like pleasing others to earn approval or rebelling instead. When we experience childhood wounds, losses, and stressful situations that significantly affect us, boundaries, roles, and even what is true can become confusing and seem unstable, leaving us afraid to take risks and lacking a sense of security to explore. Finally, positive emotional growth requires receiving, which means others must have the ability and be available for me to receive what I need from them. If not, I will focus on hiding. And highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, undermine relational trust and heighten fear that keeps people focused on performance or protection and hiding instead of healthy connection and risk, and make it difficult or impossible to receive what they need in relationships. In essence, the less safe we perceive ourselves to be physically or emotionally as children, the more we will focus on outward performance or protection and survival instead of the freedom to love and give to others. Fear will become our main driver. However, as we have previously stated, in considering all of this, it is also important to remember that no matter how healthy or unhealthy our situations, families, or caregivers were in the past, a sense of true safety in a broken world can only come through faith in a loving God as our rock and fortress, who is able to use all things for good and who is with us always. The third way childhood wounds and losses affect us is that we make conscious and unconscious internal decisions in response to them about how to protect ourselves from further hurt or fear or loss. We make decisions about trust and how and when we can trust others with our feelings, bodies, thoughts, hearts, and more. We also make decisions about authenticity and boundaries with others, and if, how, and when we can share our inner selves and feelings. Adverse childhood events and losses can leave us feeling like we should never show our true selves, and that closing off to others or the opposite, as we find ourselves giving away too much of ourselves, feelings or resources or bodies, to others too often and too soon. We also make decisions about love and whether we believe we should even try to get love, or if we should do and give away whatever we may need to get love. As you can see, we often choose one extreme or the other. And finally, we make decisions about needs, help, and guidance, such as whether our needs are unimportant or more or less important than others, and whether we feel allowed to need or ask for help or feel entitled to it and demand it. ACEs and highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, impact our sense of choices and control over how our needs can be met and how often, and lead us to uncertainty and extremes in our emotional reactions in how to manage them. Ultimately, ACEs and highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances, especially those that continue over time, actually affect brain chemistry, especially in young children, and impact our ongoing personality responses as we grow and develop. ACEs and highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances send messages to us that we receive or perceive, and then come to believe as part of our assumptions and thoughts about life, God, and relationships. Just as we learn what we look like by looking in a mirror, we primarily learn about who we are through the mirrors and reflections of other people, including their expressions, words, behavior, and responses to us in combination with our internal perceptions and experience. Through these mirrors and messages, we learn to see ourselves, God, and others in a certain way that also become ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions in the way we think and look at the world each day. We will also explore this important idea further in an upcoming workshop, but for now it's important to consider in our understanding of the impact of painful emotional events on our lives, how these affect the trunk of our tree. To summarize, the impact of ACEs in highly stressful or traumatic events and circumstances that we experience as children, especially those that continue over time. We could say that when we are hurt, are under constant stress, or face repeated or major losses, we come to conclusions and begin to make choices about who we are based on our feelings, reactions, and the mirrors people hold up to us in the process. We then begin to come to conclusions and make choices and respond to our hurts, fears, and perceptions based on our fear, such as living in a state of fight with feelings of anger, aggression, defensiveness, rebelliousness, guardedness, or protection, or feelings of freeze, just trying to blend in, pretending that everything is okay, avoiding conflict and trying to stay okay, or feelings of flee, looking for ways to escape, ways to comfort ourselves or get our needs met through our thoughts, behaviors, addictions, or fantasies, and various other solutions for finding safety and a sense of worth. Or we may find ourselves having feelings of trying to feign and please others and make everyone happy, or keep the peace and pretend to be and feel things we are not in order to earn love or avoid stress or pain. All of these responses can be done one time or as occasional reactions to fear, and they can also become defensive personality patterns and responses to protect ourselves from further pain. These thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs represent the trunk of our tree, which includes our assumptions and the lens with which we tend to see the world and how things work, because we internalize the ideas and messages we have learned from our experiences. We learn to repeat and live by the spoken and unspoken rules of the situations or culture we experienced. That's because we saw those as normal to us, and it represents the original language of life and relationships that we learn to speak. And therefore, we've come to believe both mentally and emotionally that certain things are true about ourselves, others, relationships, and God based on what we were taught and what we caught. We will cover this concept more in depth in an upcoming workshop. However, the main idea is that the trunk of our tree includes our thoughts, self-talk, and beliefs influenced by culture, knowledge, and past experiences, and our emotional lenses for how we see the world, ourselves, and others, and what we expect. They can be based in truth, lies, or partial truth that can help or hurt us. So, when we experience trauma and adverse experiences, especially those experienced as a child, it is often then leaving us with wounded emotions and painful memories, where there are parts of us that may still feel like a child, needy, demanding, undeveloped, or longing for love, and struggling to connect with God and others in grace and truth. And also a deep sense of shame, a feeling, belief, or assumption that we are bad or worthless than others in some way and need to earn or prove our value, that we are somehow uniquely flawed or not good enough in some way, and that we may be abandoned or rejected if people knew our secrets, past, fears, hurts, struggles, pain, or the real us. Why? Because all shame is based in a fear of exposure and a sense of needing to perform or be perfect in some way to prevent rejection, judgment, or condemnation. In response to this fear, we tend to either try harder to meet the mark or give up in some way on authentic connection and getting needs met in healthy and real ways. Unfortunately, this only leads to more emotional pain, isolation, or unhelpful ways of coping. We will explore shame more in depth in a later workshop because of its importance to the healing process. Finally, the branches of our tree represent our current support systems and resources and how they are affecting, impacting, and possibly triggering us in different ways. The branches of our tree stick out into our current world and relationships. If our branches are healthier, more supportive, or provide a greater supply of resources to us in terms of helpful relationships and an environment that can adequately meet our practical needs, these can better support us in our recovery. If, however, we are still connected to dysfunctional, abusive, or unhealthy people and lack adequate relational or practical resources, the chances increase that our branches will more easily be triggered and we will have negative and emotional and behavioral responses, and that they will be more difficult to manage. Our branches include things like chosen friends and partners and spouses, family, job, church, community, financial, personal, and tangible resources that we have available or in place to meet our needs. One of the goals of the HOPE program is to provide one healthy source of connection for your branches through the HOPE community and coaching calls and improve your sense of support and connection. We all learn, heal, and grow primarily through relationships, and connecting to a group like this is one of the most important steps you can take in your healing journey. As you continue with the HOPE program, I will share more with you to help you examine the areas of your tree in more depth and discuss additional ways to heal and transform each area. But to wrap up this lesson, let's look at the whole tree model together to better understand and identify what our trees need overall to produce good fruit. If you haven't already, please check out the picture of the tree model included in your note-taking guide to get the bigger picture of all that we have covered in this lesson, as I provide a brief summary of what our tree needs for healing and transformation. The picture of the tree in the note-taking guide provides more detailed description of each level of the tree and will help you see and put together the pieces that we have discussed in this video. To heal and transform, our tree needs, first of all, the right seed. At the deepest level, we need to be born again and have the power of the Holy Spirit helping and equipping us for change. This is something only God can do for you. If you have never given your heart and life to God, I encourage you to do this now and ask God to fill you with His Holy Spirit and receive the new life available to you through Christ. Even though we can't change our genetic seed, through the power of God's Spirit and what Christ has done, we can receive the new seed of His Spirit alongside of our old corrupted sin nature to give us the power we need to grow and heal in ways that others don't have. Our trees, however, also need nurturing and healthier soil. To help our tree to grow properly, we need soil that is rich in grace and truth in both our relationship with God and others. Healthy soil and relationships help us to experience things in new ways so that we can more easily receive and believe at the deep level that we need to. Trees need regular nutrients, water, and sun. Similarly, for trees to grow strong and produce good fruit, they also need regular connection to healthy people, communities, and to Christ to provide nourishment for our soul and spirit to help heal and replace past pain and allow new roots to begin to grow. As the Bible says, we need to be rooted and grounded in love to feed our growth. We also need restored roots. We need healed and restored roots, which is a main focus of this program. Our roots need healing grace to penetrate their wounds and to help release the pain and free them to grow properly again in the new soil. The HOPE program offers specific strategies to heal your wounded roots in the lessons to come. Our trees also need a solid trunk. To produce healthier fruit, our trees need a strong and solid trunk that are not easily blown over and can stand strong in storms and not easily be blown away. They are fixed and firm. A strong trunk is one that understands truth and has clarity, conviction, and discernment for responding to life. The HOPE program will also give you tools for strengthening your trunk and understanding of truth to keep you steady. Branches, Strong branches and pruning and right connections are also important for strong branches. To be healthy, we need strong branches that can bear the weight of current problems and stick out into an environment of helpful people and resources, reducing the impact of the stress or events that can more easily trigger our negative life fruit. As we allow God to heal our damaged roots and transform all the aspects of our tree by His grace and truth, our tree will grow healthier and stronger and begin producing the emotional and spiritual fruit we long for. As Jesus said in the parable, some 30, some 60, and some 100-fold. That is my hope for you through this program. Thanks for hanging in there on this longer video. I hope this lesson has given you a better overall understanding of both the circumstances and hurts that are currently affecting your emotions and behavioral fruit. I also trust that this workshop has helped you to see yourself more compassionately as a whole person, as God does, with seed, soil, roots, trunk, branches, and current fruit that are all working together in terms of the concerns you have in your life right now, and to see that there is a path for recovery and for better fruit no matter what condition your tree is in. God cares about you and your whole tree, past and present, and understands why it is producing the fruit it does. He loves us and is ready to help. In the next lesson, we will review the reflections and healing activities for this section that are vital for allowing God to continue His work of grace and truth in you as we move ahead. See you in the next lesson.